Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is Michelle Shapiro, one of your global vice chairs. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're really excited to welcome Zara Damji to our Watercooler series. Zara is the deputy editor of Chambers USA. She's been at Chambers for nearly 8 years. She knows everything there is to know about the Chambers rankings and application and referee process and all of it. And she's going to share some tips for all of us. Zara is joining us today from London. She does work on the Chambers USA publication, but will be providing some information about the publications around the world. So don't tune out if you're not in the US. Zara studied law at the University of Birmingham, so she's sort of one of us too. So we're so happy to have her. Zara, thanks very much for the generosity of your time and all the prep work you did to make today happen. We're very grateful. I also want to introduce Carolyn McNevin and Joe Ritzie Donahue. Carolyn is a shareholder at Greenberg Trowbridge. She is also the co-chair of our Rankings and Endorsement Committee, and along with Krista Tongren from Guidepost. And Joe Ritzie Donahue has her own firm in Washington, JRD Law, and she's a member of the Rankings and Endorsements Committee. The format for today is going to be that Zara, who's probably done this once or twice before, has a presentation for us with a lot of great tips. We're going to follow that up with a Q&A by Joe and Carolyn. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. I'm hoping we'll cover a lot of it, but put them in the chat. We'll see how we are on timing, and either we'll weave those questions into the Q&A that Carolyn and Joe lead, or we'll open it up. It just depends where we are on timing. But I am going to, without further ado, turn it over to Zara. If folks want to just turn on the speaker view so that they see Zara, and she's going to share her screen with a presentation.
Hello, just give me a second to get my presentation up. Thank you so much, Michelle, for the introduction, and thank you sort of to the WWCDA for hosting. I'm so glad we were able to make this happen. I really appreciate the invitation. Me and the rest of the US and Chambers as a whole are really dedicated to making sure that our rankings reflect the diversity and sort of the breadth of the market. And a huge part of that is making sure that everyone who wants to participate in the process, who wants to be considered for ranking, has the sort of tools and know-how to do so. So it's really, really great to be able to share sort of some tips with you all. I'll have my contact details up at the end, as well as that of my team at the end. So if you have any questions after the fact that we don't get to, please don't hesitate to reach out to one of us. I'll also signpost some information for anyone who is based outside the US, who wants to sort of submit to one of the other guides. I'm sure any one of my colleagues would be very, very happy to answer questions. But anyway, so let's get started. You can see my screen, I hope. So I'll start with sort of who we are at Chambers, for anyone who doesn't know us. So the US guide specifically, which is the one that I work on, it's researched by a team of over 70 researchers. It's led by sort of our research director, Kush Chima, and our head of research, James Haggerty, and then a team of research managers or deputy editors, which is what we were known as until very recently. So that's me and sort of 6 others. The sort of researchers that work on this guide come from a sort of variety of backgrounds, including sort of civil servants, formal journalists, and even qualified lawyers. The sort of research management team that I'm part of, we have sort of between us over 60 years of experience, and every year I'm sort of surprised by how much more of that I contribute to as part of that. But anyway, so for anyone who doesn't know, the Chambers process, it is free to participate in. It's open to everyone, regardless of the size of your firm. The process is the same, so it really doesn't come down to the size of your marketing department, or sort of how long a firm has been in existence for, or how sort of big it is, sole practitioners, all the way to sort of 100 firms. We sort of recognize the full range in the guide. To be considered for ranking, what you need to do generally is submit sort of 2 documents. One of those is a submission form, and then there's a referee spreadsheet for each subsection that you wish to be considered for ranking in. The submission is there to be your chance to showcase your recent work and to make a case for being ranked. And when I say recent, I should say that's the last 12 months prior to the submission deadline. That's what we consider. You will need to upload your sort of submission and referee spreadsheet to the portal on our website. If this is something you haven't done before, again, always happy to answer questions, but our inquiries team is able to, if you email them, send out a login details for you usually. As it says sort of on the slide there, we tend to rank departments and individuals, so we don't rank firms. And when we're deciding sort of who to rank and which departments or which individuals to rank, we will look at the sophistication of their work and the strength of their client and the market feedback. When it comes to departments, we will also look at their bench strength. So often there might be a correlation between sort of the number of individual rankings that a firm has and the number of, and whether they are ranked as a department as well. So I wanted to touch specifically on the white collar side in this case, obviously. When you're looking at kind of what sections you should submit to or looking to submit to, we do have dedicated white collar litigation sections in almost sort of most of the states in the US now. So the white collar sections, they recognize sort of the full range of work that sort of, including criminal trials, appeals, enforcement proceedings, external and internal investigations, both on behalf of individuals and companies. Our approach has always been to rank lawyers according to the state in which they're based. So in this case, so any work that you do outside the state that you're based in will still count towards a ranking. So even if you've got a national or international practice, we would still rank you in the state that you are, and consider all the work outside that state. Otherwise, as you can imagine, the rankings would be changing every year and people would be jumping between state to state as their kind of work can often shift. Besides kind of the main white collar litigation sections, we've also got specialist FCPA, FCA, and government relations congressional investigation sections, which might be relevant. We're also always happy to hear about new sections. So if there's any practice areas that you think, or subsections or specialties that you think we're missing, I would love to hear from you. So please do get in touch. We want to make sure that our rankings are sort of comprehensive and accurate. So it really does help to know where we've sort of missed out on a market. Then sort of rankings process. So like I said, the things that we look at when we're ranking, mostly our rankings are derived from the submission forms and the feedback from clients and also the market. So this can include other lawyers, law professors, members of the judiciary and beyond. With the market feedback, the importance of this does tend to vary, but in sections like white collar litigation, we do sort of like to see which lawyers and firms are sort of the most visible in the market. And this is why sort of we like to speak to peers. We also recognize that in a section like white collar, you might be wary to give us details about your clients, or your clients might not necessarily want to talk about your work. So you're always welcome to sort of, also put forward lawyers as referees in this section. And that's why we tend to sort of use lawyer feedback as a way to fill in the gaps when we're not getting sort of client feedback as well. So it can be a useful backup source in that case. So I thought that it might sort of to give you an idea of the scale of the US 2022 guide, I've included some stats. I should say that we have just finished sort of researching this guide quite recently. It doesn't launch till the 1st of June, so these are very much like first look figures that you're getting. They might change slightly. I'm sure there will be some sort of reshuffling that needs to be done. So do bear that in mind if you look on 1st of June and some of these numbers are a little bit different. These are very sort of preliminary. But as you can see, you know, we rank over 8,800 departments. That's more than sort of 1,600 unique law firms are ranked in the guide at the moment. Also thought it'd be helpful to look at it from a white collar perspective. We have 287 departmental rankings for white collar litigation across the US. When it comes to individuals, we've got sort of more than 23,000 individual lawyers ranked. That's more than 21,000 unique lawyers. And more than 1,000 of those are sort of unique lawyers ranked in white collar sections. So you can see that makes up a significant portion of the guide is white collar lawyers, when you look at it that way. And also it is one of the sections actually that's grown the most over the last 5 years. I did get a little bit excited when I was looking at these data sets. It worked out that we've had a 49% growth since 2018 in the number of white collar lawyers ranked. So this really is one of our biggest sections, and one of the sections that, you know, year on year we've been continuing to grow and look at. And a huge part of that, both sort of the growth in terms of rankings and white collar rankings has been sort of women lawyers. This is something, you know, we're really dedicated to making sure. We know that we have, you know, a ways to go in this area, but we are trying to make sure that our rankings reflect the breadth of the market. And sort of, as you can see from the slide, since 2016, we've added sort of more than 2,000 sort of female lawyers to the guide. And if you look at the 2022 guide, 43% of the up and coming lawyers in the section are women. We've also sort of more than doubled, I think, the sort of proportion of women who make up the proportion of white collar lawyers who are women as well. That has sort of more than doubled. So just on this, I thought it would be sort of useful to look at sort of our approach to diversity, which we consider a core part of our research. For anyone who has looked at a submission form before, or hopefully will after today, you'll see that we've got a D&I survey on the submission. This is entirely voluntary. Participation isn't mandatory, but we really strongly encourage that firms do participate. This is to help us better understand the market, so we can look at how our rankings are reflecting the market, so we can see the sort of breakdown of male and female lawyers and the proportion of diverse attorneys. We also encourage firms who are submitting to provide a referee list that's as close to being gender balanced as possible. We do recognize that this won't always be possible, but it does inform the sort of scope of views that we get back, and helps us identify practitioners who have sort of historically been overlooked. We're also making much greater efforts to speak with female and minority lawyers when we do calls with law firms. And, you know, we're always happy to be sort of flexible about accommodating sort of multiple lawyers on a call to make sure that women lawyers are getting an opportunity to do so in firms where previously maybe, you know, the same head of department has done it sort of multiple years. Our main goal in all of this is to make sure that our processes and output, that everything that we're doing everything possible to ensure that our rankings reflect the market, and diversifying the sources that we speak to, so that we can diversify the range of sort of attorneys and firms that we're choosing to investigate further. So if you wanted to participate, like I said, we've finished wrapping up the US 2022 guide, but the USA 2023 guide will be researched later this year. So the first deadline is on July 14th. Research will begin on August 1st. The research schedule did just go up on the website on Tuesday, so this is a great week for us to have this presentation. It should be available now, so you can see the deadlines for each section. They do vary by state and practice area if you haven't sort of participated before. So you search by whichever sections it is that you're interested in submitting to. We expect that the guide will be released in June 2023, which will be sort of the same timeline as it is this year. Anyway, so looking at the submission process, we find that, submitting, while it's not sort of mandatory, it does significantly increase the likelihood that a firm will be ranked, because the submission provides Chambers with a deeper understanding of the firm's capabilities relative to its competitors, putting the group and individual attorneys in the best position to be considered for ranking. With a submission, you're able to tell us your story, meaning that you can put forward an accurate picture of the practice without us having to learn about it from third-party sources. It also allows you to showcase the full bench strength of the team and demonstrate expertise in related practice areas. We've also made real effort to simplify the submissions process over recent years to hopefully make it less of a time investment. Again, particularly, in the hopes that it will encourage more sort of smaller firms to submit and make the process sort of more transparent than it has been. With the submission form, when you are filling it out, the most important part of it from our point of view is the work itself, including descriptions of the work. In terms of the level of detail that this should contain, my advice is always that conciseness is key. Work highlights especially should be simple and efficiently written. A well-written work highlight is similar to a newspaper article, a short 2 or 3 sentence lead, which factually explains what took place, followed by a more detailed understanding of why it's important. It's understood that this is not always possible in technically complex sections, or those with like multiple claims and appeals, but in general, conciseness is key. When it comes to instances where you can't release client names and work highlights, which I appreciate will be more common in white collar sections than it will be in, say, corporate M&A, please remember that you are allowed to keep client names sort of hidden. We'd always prefer that we have the name of the client for corroboration purposes, but we do understand that sometimes this is not going to be possible. If it's a particularly impressive work highlight you want to include but can't name the client, please include as much detail as possible regarding the details and scope of the work, and we'll work with what we have. Matter values are an important metric to gauge the significance of work highlights, but again, we understand this will not always be applicable to all practice areas, especially white collar litigation again. But where possible, it is helpful to see those. In terms of which attorneys to include, there's no such thing as sort of, lawyer, we do have rankings for up and coming lawyers as well as sort of established lawyers. So it's never sort of too early as a lawyer to get involved in the process. We also rank associates as well. In this case, the sort of feedback section allows you to give us important market commentary, showing us that the practice area from the team's perspective and pointing out possible oversights and omissions in our rankings. As we're always seeking to expand and improve our rankings, this is also a good place to include suggestions for other practice areas. So other specialties within white collar that we could be exploring would be always helpful to see. I've touched on this a little bit, but just to sort of say, Chambers takes confidentiality extremely seriously. We wouldn't exist if law firms and lawyers didn't have confidence in us handling sensitive information. So thank you for the trust that you put in us. But also it is imperative that we maintain that confidence. And it's probably our #1 considerations when it comes to getting the guide ready to go. This is true for all sections, but we recognize that it's especially important in a section like white collar, where the work is going to be incredibly sensitive. We store the submissions securely, and all confidential information is very clearly delineated. On the submission, there's dedicated space for confidential work highlights. And we understand that sometimes you'll need to refer to confidential information in biographies and descriptions. So whenever you do, please make sure that it's as obvious as possible that something is confidential in the submission. When it comes to interviews, particularly with clients, we're extra safe in making sure that they're comfortable and providing sensitive information to us. In calls, we ask the clients to explain what kind of work a firm has done, and we allow them to reveal as much as they want to. We don't imply prior knowledge, even if we've seen work in the submission about it. If clients don't want to discuss specifics about the work, that's completely fine. We'll just skip to a discussion about the lawyers and the law firm and how they performed. When we're editing the guide and getting it ready to go out, the two foremost considerations in our mind are accuracy and confidentiality. Researchers are the first line of defense, and they'll obviously not include confidential information in their write-up. When a researcher passes on their editorial, it'll be a research manager or deputy editor whose first job is to check information against the submission to make sure there's nothing confidential in there. It's what I've been doing predominantly this week, so this is a very nice break. Then it's passed on to our head of research, James, who does the same thing again. So that triple lock means that we're very confident in our ability to handle sensitive information. Next slide. I also wanted to talk through some of the things that we consider when we're talking to referees and some advice on what to put on your referee spreadsheet and the way to go about talking to clients. So referees are probably the most important part of what we do, and it's imperative that we speak to referees who actually want to and have time to speak with us. The most valuable referee from our point of view is one who can offer informed opinions on the quality of the legal provider, while also having the ability to speak freely and in depth with us. General counsel, CEOs are often difficult to pin down and may only have a fleeting relationship with the lead lawyer on an engagement. Sometimes, deputy and associate GCs or even corporate litigation counsel often have greater flexibility and greater insight into the external legal team. It makes no difference to us whether the feedback came from a GC of a Fortune 500 company or corporate counsel. We'll take that feedback as it is if it comes from the company as a whole. In terms of the view that referees have on your practice area, we do encourage firms to include clients on their referee list usually, but we recognize that in white collar sections, this can be trickier given the nature of the work. So it's by no means a requirement that you provide client referees. Please also feel free to refer co-counsel, other peers, judges, mediators, legal professors, anyone else who has a good insight on the work from the last 12 months and is happy to speak with us. We always encourage that you check with your referees and make sure that they are happy to provide feedback and that they know to expect that someone will reach out to them. Generally, we will reach out to them once at the start of the research period and then once again halfway through the research period. Our questioning is very general, just to allow as much room as possible to the referee to give their own views. We will ask them what kind of work the firm did and then give them free rein to pick out which lawyers they worked with and who they want to provide commentary on before filling in any gaps ourselves. If they have multiple referrals, we'll repeat this for every practice that they've worked with. And then sort of the final step in the process is law firm interviews. So there's a few questions up there on the website, which I'll try to answer right now, just because they frequently come up. We're not able to interview every ranked or submitting department. This is because we want to make sure that we are prioritizing referee outreach. And we want to make sure that researchers have time to properly analyze the submissions that you spend so much time putting together. So we speak to a cross-section of lawyers chosen to give us the broadest, most accurate picture of the market. But if your firm isn't chosen for an interview, it's not any sort of judgment at all. It's just about making sure that we have a cross-section of sources that we're talking to. The reason that we do talk to lawyers as well as referees is twofold. It allows us to sort of, better understand developments in the market, and speaking to lawyers about their competitors gives us a more complete picture when combined with the feedback from referees. We will obviously take it with a pinch of salt where required. There isn't any sort of benefit, again, to agreeing to an interview. We're very grateful when lawyers do agree to be interviewed, both when we reach out as referees and when we reach out to sort of talk to the law firm sort of as part of our wider market research. We wouldn't be able to produce such sort of well-informed, objective research without everyone who speaks to us every year being so generous with our time. So really do appreciate that. And then, so in this slide, you can kind of view the details of key contacts on the Chambers team, including the practice area specialties of myself and the other research managers. As you will probably have spotted, Alec there is generally the best contact for white collar questions, but any of us, myself included, would be very happy to point you in the right direction or answer questions about kind of the research process more generally. Also, as promised, this is there's a list of contacts here for other jurisdictions for anyone who's joining us today from outside the US. Again, I'm sure any of them would be able to help you, but I will also put this slide deck, or we will be circulating this slide deck, so don't worry about sort of quickly scribbling down any sort of email addresses. That's everything in my presentation. I'm happy to sort of answer questions.
Thanks so much, Sarah. So let's turn it over to Joe and Carolyn for some follow-up.
Thank you. Let's see if we can get that. Shall we get the tile off so we can see each other? So Zara, thank you so much for that good presentation. Can you tell us, please, in your view, since we're obviously part of the rankings initiative, Joe and I are, what else can WWCDA do to help its members get ranked or to get ranked higher?
So I think this is a really big part of it, is sharing information about the rankings process. So I feel like you've got a good sort of first step here. We're also very I was actually just talking to Kush about this yesterday, about sort of other ways we'd love to work with you as an organization. We're happy to sort of hear about sort of developments in the market, new up and coming lawyers, maybe people who've come out of the government who are particularly promising that we should be keeping an eye on. If you want to send us information about developments like that. Any other sort of insight you have on the market as well, we'd love to sort of hear about. Actually, we've spoken to sort of several of your members, either as referees or as sort of lawyers when we've done, or sort of as ranked lawyers when we've done interviews with them, and they always talk about, we've had really good feedback about what a good sort of network this is, and how that does sort of has fed into who they're sort of referring work to, but also who they're talking about when we ask about feedback in the in our interviews with them. And that's something to keep in mind as well. When we do interview sort of anyone, either as referees or as part of our market feedback, do think about who else you've worked with, because those questions are always sort of open-ended, because we want to hear about other lawyers in the market. It should generally be lawyers that you've worked with, but anyone else, anyone that's been particularly promising that you might have connected to either through the WWCDA or, any other sort of women lawyers across the market. Like, it's something to keep in mind when you're doing the research. One of my sort of least favorite things is when we sort of talk to a lawyer about sort of the market, and they point out how sort of male dominated our rankings are. And then they don't have any other sort of suggestions for who we should add in terms of other women lawyers. So it's really, really good to sort of keep in mind who you think is missing from the rankings, and for you, either as an organization or on an individual level, to get in touch and let us know who we're missing. will be really, really helpful.
Thank you, Zara. So just to be clear, so that there are two opportunities for someone who's involved in the process to put forward other members. One is in the interview, whether they're being interviewed as a lawyer or a referee. Is there any way that it can also be on the submission form in terms of the other suggestion?
Yeah, so the submission form has a feedback section, which allows you to put down any feedback about our rankings. So you can use that as a way to identify any omissions or anyone that you feel is underrated, overrated, both within your firm, but also outside your firm as well, is always very helpful. So definitely make the most of that. And then also, obviously, when we do interview you, having a think about who else. It should really be lawyers that you've sort of worked with or come across sort of in the context of like specific matter, ideally, but you can speak to sort of the broader market as well and their involvement in sort of other sort of professional activities.
Terrific, thank you. And can
Marilyn,
you,
before we move off that point, I think it's so important. I just want to come back to the interviews and underscore that when any of you are doing these chambers interviews, either on behalf of your firm or because you're a referee, it would be wonderful if you could come prepared with like 3, Zara, is that the right number? Maybe 3 names of other women practitioners in this field who you think chambers should be seriously evaluating.
I mean, there's no limit on it. We'll sort of restrict you to 3. If you've got more than that, definitely come prepared with more. The main thing is really that, you know, you're able to provide sort of informative and sort of informed feedback about their work. So if you've worked with more women, and again, also like, don't forget up and coming women as well. I think sometimes people tend to restrict themselves to the most senior lawyer in a matter, but also think about who really shone in terms of associates and up and coming lawyers. We also, you know, with up and coming lawyers, especially, even if they don't get enough feedback to be ranked now, that will cumulatively build up over the years for them to be ranked. So do think about it. But even, you know, if they're really young, we've got, I don't have the number in front of me, but you saw how many up and coming lawyers we have ranked. That's something that we've grown so much over recent years because we're really dedicated to improving our coverage of that. But yeah, so have a think about who else has really impressed you in the last year, people you've seen in a case, people you know have handled a really big matter, any other sort of women who've really shone in your opinion. Come prepared with the list of names, whether that's 3 or 30. We will never turn down feedback. We might have to ask you to put some of it in a follow-up email if we run out of time, but we'll always be happy to hear about sort of women doing great work. Never, not enough time for that.
that's right, there never is, because there is a lot of great work. So one of the things that our members are wondering is if a name comes forward and an attorney receives strong appraisals from a number of sources, but it doesn't make the list this year, do you keep a list of those names? In other words, if somebody is referred by a number of people or puts in a strong application, but it doesn't quite make it this year, do you have a list that you keep in your back pocket that you're looking at the next year? How does that work?
Yes, we do. We have sort of an internal shortlist that we sort of keep, and then we'll use that to sort of prompt questions when we do interviews next year. But also, Chambers has historically, we've like had a great focus on like someone's cumulative feedback. So if they're getting sort of consistently getting good feedback over a few years, that really says a lot about the quality of their work, especially if it's coming from different sort of sources each year. It can be really, really impressive to see that trajectory. We're trying to sort of that there's less of a requirement for that at the younger end of the market. So with up and coming lawyers, we tend to be sort of more, they tend to sort of enter the rankings quicker. But yeah, particularly as you get sort of higher up the bands, that cumulative trajectory is really, really important for us to see. So yeah, even if you submit 1 year and you don't get ranked, don't be discouraged. That's really, really important. It's always really disappointing from our end to see a great submission, but it's not quite enough to get over the line. and we're really hopeful for next year. And then next year we don't get a submission, and so the feedback tails off, which is upsetting when it's a sort of really good firm. So please do submit again. Usually in those cases, if you get in touch with us, we're always happy to give you pointers and sort of like give you indications about sort of like we have an insight product where firms can sort of purchase a report which gives them better insights into their submission, which can give you some of this information about where in the rankings, sort of, even if you didn't make it into the rankings, how much feedback did you get, and sort of whether you did make some headway towards a ranking.
Thank you. And so that's very helpful. And you've given us a lot of good pointers about nuts and bolts, but I'm just wondering if you have an example in your mind of a really good application, if you could sort of just talk with us a little bit about what makes it a strong application. Is it, the quality of the referrals? Is it the quality of the work? What is it that you're looking for when you open up that application?
It's both, really. The feedback is really important, but so is the quality of the work. We want to see that lawyers and sort of firms are being trusted with sophisticated, important work. When it comes to sort of departmental rankings, we do want to see that there's a bench. It's not just sort of one key lawyer, but for individual rankings, we want to see sort of the quality of the individual's work. Like I said, we don't want tons and tons of detail, but give us relevant information about what makes the matter impressive as well. So not just I did this, but also this is important because it's establishes a precedent in this area, or this is the first time an investigation like this was brought into this kind of company in this industry, or even if it's not sort of novel, groundbreaking work, which obviously will not sort of always be, but we want to see sort of what is it that makes that interesting, and sort of where it is unique, what makes it unique. So yeah, I think that's sort of what I did about the submission form and what makes it sort of good. Also giving us a few examples of work, so not just you can submit up to 20 work highlights, but actually you don't have to submit all 20, but do give us enough work highlights for us to have a good understanding of your work, to see the full breadth of it where possible. The other thing, actually, I just realized I forgot to say that I should have, which is really important. As of Tuesday, we've announced that we're upping the number of referees to 30 per subsection. So this is a really, really big change for us. We've been 20 for the last sort of 4 or 5 years per subsection. Part of our sort of announcement and our communications to firms was that we really want to encourage firms to use the additional 10 referees to make sure that they are providing referees for female lawyers, diverse lawyers, up-and-coming lawyers. We hate to see, referee spreadsheets where all the referee slots have been given to sort of male lawyers. So we're hoping that this will really increase the number of referees that we're speaking to, but also that it will increase the number of sort of referees that are being used by sort of female lawyers. So that's a really big change for us.
That's a good development. Thank you. Thank you. Joe, do you have some questions, I think?
Thanks, Carolyn, and thanks so much, Zara. And I also wanted to pick up with one quick thread just to clarify, but it sounded like in your discussion with Kush that you actually would be open to thinking about how to directly interact with WWCDA to get some conversation going so that we could give you some market intelligence or things that might help round out, particularly in the white collar space, or did I, or am I sort of overreaching there?
That's correct. No, that is correct. We'd love to sort of hear from you, in whatever format really that would work, but maybe sort of once a research cycle starts, so maybe August or over the course of the research cycle, if you want to get in touch with sort of any developments, because we understand that we've got a lot to learn from you guys as well, and we really want to figure out the best ways to work with, you know, WWCDA and sort of other sort of organizations in the industry. This is sort of not something we've formalized, but it would be great to sort of work out something that works for you and for us as well, because you've got sort of loads of insights to share with us about the market, I'm sure.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for that invitation. I am sure we will be back in touch to follow up on that. So, and obviously, incredibly generous for you to be here. And this is really interesting for all of us. As we had a chance to chat a little bit before in preparation, as I told you, I was part of Big Law for all of my career until very recently. And so I also want to just make sure, and I got a ping from at least one of our small firm, part of what WWCDA does really well is to be very inclusive of sort of the full range and size, just like it sounds like, sort of a match for how Chambers approaches its rankings. And so I did note that you included in your remarks about how, small, large, in between, whatever, it's the same process and you will get the same vetting. But just to sort of break it down a little bit more, as, there may be differences in terms of process in a small firm where it's sort of like, you're doing perhaps, many more pieces of running the firm, and maybe would be a little bit more involved in the, submitting the application than maybe some attorneys at bigger firms have to do, and have, don't have large marketing departments. Just sort of really thinking sort of nuts and bolts about process a little bit more, in addition to your remarks. When you have someone who's more of a lawyer and not a marketing person, and they're thinking about putting together that application, what I heard is, if you go to your website, you go to the sort of whatever section, white collar, you've broken down some of the pieces that would be the most relevant by your state, by your location. There are two different parts of the application. You'd have the submission. So I assume, there's that form, and you download, and you have the referee form, right? And then you just fill those out, right? And I assume that if people have questions, they can, there's either a contact on the website, or, perhaps that's, you'd be willing to feed that to someone who's appropriate. But is there, just sort of thinking about it from a process, and if you don't have a marketing department taking care of that, you go to the website, you get the, the forms, and then if people have questions, how's the best, what do you mean by this, or, how much detail here? Is there any way to sort of follow up on that? Is there any other like little tips, maybe from a really practical nuts and bolts perspective, for solo or small firm practitioners? So I said we have some who have been pinging on, getting a little bit more deep, I think granular perhaps about that detail, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you've sort of outlined the process there perfectly. There is a, so firstly, you're always welcome to reach out to me or one of the other sort of research managers on the guide. We'd be always very happy to sort of point you out in the right direction. It's always sort of, really rewarding when you have a firm submit for the first time, particularly like smaller firms, and then they get ranked, and it's lovely to see. So I am always happy to answer those questions. What I'd say, there is an inquiries email address on our website, but I'll pop in my email address and a link to my colleagues in the chat as well in a second. I'll also pop in my phone number. I should say, just because we're really busy editing the 2022 guide, there might be a little bit more of a delay at this time of year if you send us an email. But we will get back to you, even if it's in May, but we will get back to you. And if you don't hear from us by mid-May, email again. But I'm sure it'll be sooner than that usually. But yeah, we're always happy to answer those questions. I'll also pop in the inquiries email in the chat, and I'll share this slide deck which has those emails. I think in terms of sort of smaller firms as well, the process is the same. We do recognize, particularly with smaller firms, that we don't expect to see as much, not every work highlight will be filled in. You don't have to fill in all 20 with smaller firms, or particularly sole practitioners. We completely understand that you won't have worked on 20 different kind of matters in the last year. If you've been working on one or two really big ones, that's absolutely fine. Same with referees. You don't have to, have all well, 30 now, not 20, or 30 referees, if you want to sort of focus in on a few key ones. I'd say, you know, do have a handful per lawyer, because that makes it more likely that we will speak to enough people for a lawyer to be ranked, but at least a handful for each lawyer. But yeah, you don't have to sort of put in as much detail in the submission as maybe sort of a bigger firm would, because they'd be using up every work highlight box. I think otherwise, in terms of tips, nothing else really comes to mind off the top of my head, but use all the resources that you've got. Oh, I can, in terms of updates, because sometimes the dates can be hard to keep track of, I can put people on our mailing list. So again, either feel free to email me, or I don't know if you want to sort of collate that and send it to me, if whoever does want to be added to it, but I'm happy to kind of add people onto that. If we do that, I'll say, bear in mind that we won't necessarily, you know, if our emails do end up in a spam folder, like that does happen. So look for the research schedule on our website. That's the main thing for deadlines, so you don't miss it. And the submission link I'll put in the chat right now.
That's really helpful. I didn't even know there was a mailing list. Once you said it, I was like, oh, of course. You know, why wouldn't that be? So that's really helpful, as is the, and I may be oversimplifying, but what I hear is sort of quality over quantity, which I'm sure is, you know, the case for everybody, but maybe it was really helpful the way you broke that down in terms of having a smaller firm and what that means. So that was really great. Appreciate all of that. We just got another, and maybe I'll add that in, not that it's necessarily related, but we just got a chat. I know, Michelle, you're monitoring those, but if you don't mind, I'll just pick that up on diversity. I know you had a slide on, you know, your commitment to diversity. One of the questions was, do you do any metrics? Do you keep track of any metrics with respect to diversity? I will say, Zara, and I'm sure this is not the first time you've heard it, when I saw, if I did my math right, and again, you know, I went into lawyering because math is not my strongest suit, but if I did my math right, I think I saw that the latest stats were for women, about 5,500 women. It was somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 total women. There was a slide that you had. It had to do with like how many had increased overall from 2016, but I think that was a total. Is that right? Because I was like, gosh, is that over the whole 24,000 or something total ranked individuals? Like I could have my math wrong, but
I would need to double check that.
Yeah.
I was looking at this data set earlier today. I can't remember that number off the top of my head, but I think it's a little over that. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I'll sort of, it has grown sort of quite, you know, gradually over the last few years, but it is definitely, and it is, you know, but we are aware that sort of, you know, from section to section, it does vary a lot, and that there is sort of work to be done in this case. And we can only sort of, you know, we want to sort of make sure that our rankings are accurately reflecting the market, and that includes sort of the full sort of, you know, like breadth of, you know, women are accurately represented, and also sort of, you know, that other ethnicities and sort of sexualities are all accurately reflected in the rankings, and there is a lot of ways to go, which is why we've been focusing so much on diversifying sort of who we speak to, in trying to also make sure that we are encouraging firms to diversify who they feature on their submissions, and that we are encouraging sort of, you know, sort of smaller firms and women-led firms, sort of more sole practitioners to submit as well, and sort of making the process more simple to be able to enable that to happen. You know, we're really hoping that sort of, you know, firms, industry groups will all work with us to make sure that we get to the place where our rankings are sort of, you know, reflecting who is actually in the market and not just who has historically been in the market, which is definitely sort of something that could be said about sort of rankings like these.
And clearly your being here and spending this much time with us today and in preparation speaks volumes as far as I'm concerned about Chamber's commitment and using their resources toward that. And obviously the WWCDA and the Rankings Committee in particular is very committed to anything we can do to support that goal. So Michelle, Carolyn, why don't I turn it back over? I know we've got other possible.
I've got a couple of things that have come in both to the chat for everyone and also just direct to me. So one question is, we do have participants out from outside of the US. Zara, and your experience is obviously largely US based, but I know you work closely with your colleagues, and thank you for sharing the contact information for folks around the world. Are there any particular like key distinctions in the process around the world, or does it generally follow the same basic approach, with the differences being in, sort of more at the margins?
So I think the research process is generally the same. The dates vary, so the timeline of research varies quite significantly for different guides, and also sort of the way the sections are structured. So I think in the UK, there's a financial crime section. There isn't an overall sort of white collar section, so that is a little bit different. They've got a few other sections around that, but so the way that kind of the guides approach different sections will vary depending on sort of the market and how we felt that the market approaches it. So I think that's it really. I think the other sort of thing that varies is that they have different sort of research managers oversee different sort of jurisdictions. That's how the other guides are structured, whereas we do it by practice area across the US. So the contacts vary a lot, even sort of within like LATAM or within sort of Asia. But in terms of sort of the key principles, they are essentially the same. So it's really just about kind of the details that vary.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Another question was, when we were talking earlier about women or lawyers in general, helping to advance diversity by coming to your sessions, your interviews, armed with the names and details about women and minority practitioners. Does that apply equally to people getting ranked for the first time as well as people moving through the ranking? So moving from a 3 to a 2 to a 1.
Yeah, both. Anyone that you think is an omission from the rankings, but also anyone that you think is underrated. Yeah. Look, when we do sort of market interviews, we usually send a link to the sort of rankings in advance. And we'll say, like, please, if you have the time to review those and take a look at where you think we can improve, or where you think the market has moved on from those rankings. So do take a look. Also, you're not restricted to only commenting on the states or sections that we sort of request an interview about. You're always welcome to sort of nominate people in other states, or look through some of our rankings in other markets as well, and have a look at who you think is sort of underrated, not just in DC, but also New York or Florida or Texas, which is my baby. So yeah, definitely look across the section. With moving up the rankings, we do look at it's the same factors that come into play, both when we're deciding whether to rank someone or whether we're deciding whether to move someone up or down. But it's really about the quality of their work. It's really about the quality of the feedback that they're getting. As you move up the rankings, the bar tends to be higher and higher. Sometimes it takes longer and longer kind of for a lawyer to sort of achieve that. But it can, it's sort of, none of it would be possible if everyone did sort of participate and take the time to really reflect on our rankings and give us sort of informed feedback.
Yeah, and not that anyone enjoys talking negatively about people, but I think implicit in what you're saying is that we should be prepared to advocate for people who we think should make the list, but also be comfortable sharing with you and your colleagues where we think that the lists are a bit stale, and that perhaps there are some, you know, maybe older white men, for example, hypothetically speaking, who are on the incumbent lists, who perhaps are not really as active in their practices as they once were, so that you should be thinking about removing them at some point.
Yeah, that is helpful. Like, we want to make sure that, you know, our rankings are accurate reflection of the market, and if someone isn't practicing anymore, then we want to hear about that. So do tell us when that is the case. With I'm trying to say, yeah, with like feedback that isn't sort of positive, we never print that feedback, is the thing to bear in mind. When we do print quotes in the guide, but they're always completely anonymous, and we only print the positive feedback in the guide. Everything else is to help us make ranking decisions. So while it will inform our ranking decisions, no one will know even that you've spoken to us, let alone what you've said. We take, you know, the confidentiality of our interviews really, really seriously. As I said, we assure all referees this so that they feel like they can speak to us openly, but also, you know, lawyers will never reveal our sources and who's told us something. So you are always welcome to speak candidly, which we do because we want everyone to feel comfortable giving us that accurate, sort of honest feedback about the rankings.
That's
And
terrific.
realize a big part of that is going to be where someone's overrated, or, you know, not sort of.
So we're bumping up against the hour. I think we've gotten to all of the questions in the chat, and just want to highlight again that Zara was kind enough to put her contact information in there and invites all of us to reach out. And certainly as the association, and in particular the rankings and endorsements committee, I think we have some follow-up to do. We would love to take you up on the invitation to collaborate a bit more on how we can help you increase the diversity of your list. So we'll reach out about that. We can also help you advertise the timelines and things like that. So we should definitely stay in touch. So
that would be excellent. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Please don't hesitate to get in touch with questions. I'd be really happy to answer anything we didn't get to today, or anything that you think of after the fact, or if you have any feedback about our rankings or our approach, or any other ideas about how we can sort of make sure that our rankings are sort of as diverse as they should be.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Really.
thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.